And the one thing though that I do remember, and that, like I said, I wanted to correct, is when I came to Women in Transition, the hotline was on like 2 or 3 days a week until noon. You know, it was very sporadic. Shirley was the only person working the line at that time.
When I was on the line, my shift was 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. And I remember, because I was working and going to school, and I remember like sitting up in the bed with my resource manual. It was thicker than it is now, and all my paperwork, my ICR, and we always had an ICR, like surrounding me on the bed, and hoping that I didn't sound like I had dozed off when people called. So yeah, so it was 24/7. We had a hotline coordinator who would schedule all the shifts, schedule the supervisor who was going to be on call that weekend. And we used to get comp time for being on call because we were on call for transferring the line from one volunteer to the other. And also, if a volunteer had a challenging call and needed to process it. So we were available the whole weekend. We had beepers or pagers. And at that time, only doctors and drug dealers had them, but so that volunteers would have access to us because not everybody had a cell phone back then.
I think it was one of those things. That's what I loved about it. I think that was a consensus that we came to somehow or another, and that we, you know, as we grew, as we went from those few days a week, few hours, and we began to extend. And then we got to a place where we felt like we could do the 24-hour thing. I can't remember all the discussions that went into it, but I'm pretty sure that it was a group decision or whatever, you know, because at that time we did everything like that. That was one of the things that I loved about the agency. We were very much into consensus. Nobody's opinion was too little, too small, too great. The other thing, there was quite a bit of discussion as to whether or not we were going to do a joint hotline with Women Against Abuse, whether there was going to be a triple, you know, everybody was going to be in the same line. And we decided for ourselves that we would have a line of our own, because at the time we were doing separation and divorce and employment and all that other stuff. We were doing other things besides domestic violence.
Yeah.
So we decided at that time that we would build a hotline for ourselves, and that's what we did.
The DV collab, I think the DV director started meeting all together maybe in like 97 or 98, if I remember correctly, is when the Philly, they called themselves the DV4. The DV4 just, you know, started to meet and to try to work together on different projects in the city. And at that time, the huge project was getting a hotline to be 24 hours and working together in a collaboration to make sure that a live counselor would be able to answer that line 24 hours a day. So it was really interesting because before that, each agency, believe it or not, had their own hotline. So there were 4 different hotline numbers, and LSH had 2 different numbers because we had an English line and a Spanish speaking line. And so as you can imagine, it was a lot to try to get both of those lines covered. We depended a lot on volunteers. And so, you know, volunteers, they would come, commit a certain amount of time, and then they would be gone. And so it just made sense for us to try to come together to put all of our resources into one pot to make it easier for all of us and to cut down on expenses, because like I said, each agency had their own line at the time. And so I believe that's when the work of the DV4 started, and, you know, it was successful. We were able to put a plan together, make this a 24-hour hotline. Each agency decided what shifts would work best for them, depending on their hours, because Women Against Abuse is the only 24-hour DV program in the city. And so Yeah. And so then, it all came together and we started to work the hotline. And there were some pros and cons to that. The pro was we were all able to save on resources and come together to make sure that survivors had support 24 hours a day. The sad part about that was we could no longer cover the hotline from home.
So in the 70s, prior to 71 and when WIT and other programs were getting started, there was an underground. There was always a woman or someone in the community that someone could go to for help. So it's sort of this underground network. The same was true of women seeking abortion. There's just been this underground network. So once these agencies like WIT and NPCADV and all the other agencies started to come together, the hotline was the initial focus, and then shelters or safe havens. So the hotline is the oldest part of the domestic violence networks movement.